Hello and welcome to the Real Estate Nerds Podcast. On this Bad Beats episode, we will explore the human side of real estate investing with a seasoned pro about to make the legendary worst deal of their life. A deal isn't just the investment, it is also the person. Stay with us and learn what it takes to be the best investor. Hi, and welcome to the Real Estate Nerds Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Royal Smith, owner of Royal Legal Solutions, home for everything real estate asset protection. I'm here with my good friend, Matthew. Matthew is a real estate genius of sorts, but not immune to the human errors of life that can cause us to all have sorrow and lose money. Matthew, thanks for coming on the show today. I really think that we learn the most from our mistakes than anything else. And so today we're going into a bad beats or, worst deal episode. And so what do we need to learn about you today, Matthew, to be able to have like a good background of, who you are before you got into this deal and, what do we need to know?
Yeah. Well, it's pleasure being on the show, man. Excited to chat some real estate, talk about the times that I was probably crying in my beer, wishing that I wasn't in real estate, and I'm damn glad that I kept pushing forward. So I know we'll get into that here in a few minutes. For those that don't know who I am a real estate investor. I invest in Northern California. Here in Sacramento is home base for me, but I invest Sacramento to Silicon Valley. So I do stuff out in the Bay Area as well, which our market is insane. And I started putting a lot of time and energy more into the Bay Area deals, being that, one profit margin on a Bay Area deal, just due to price point, is like doing 4 or 5 out here in Sacramento. I initially started as a real estate agent. So I got right out of college, paid a bunch of money for a piece of paper that I ultimately decided I did not want to use, didn't want to jump into corporate America, didn't want to put my fate, my future in somebody else's hands, and really wanted, the freedom and flexibility that goes along with entrepreneurship. I wanted unlimited earning potential, no ceiling on what I could make and achieve. I wanted to obviously be able to help people in the process and, help them achieve their goals. But I also wanted that sexiness of, the lifestyle and being able to spend your time with who you want, when you want, where you want. And I also didn't want to just collect a paycheck. I wanted to actually be in a space that I could generate real wealth in the process. And when I was doing research after college, it kept coming back to real estate. So I jumped into real estate, full steam ahead about 8 years ago, and built up a real estate team to the Wall Street Journal Top 1,000 2 years back to back. Simultaneously, I started flipping houses. Started buying rental properties over the last, 5 or so years. I've flipped over 150 houses, have built a 7-figure rental portfolio that continues to grow and expand. And recently, over the last few years, have really started getting into the education, information product space of teaching people how to flip through courses, direct mail, different things like that. So that's really been a passion of mine of one, I think, everybody has the one track mindset of like, how do I fill my own cup first and make as much money as I can? And then when you get there, you're like, this is great, but it's not that rewarding, that fulfilling, and money isn't everything. And how can we give back more? And so that's kind of what led me into the education and information space. And there's been many majestic failures along the way. One of them, obviously going to be sharing with you guys, but that's a little background information in a very quick 2-minute synopsis.
Yeah, man. Before we jump into the worst deal, you brought up something about like making the money and then being like, oh, shit, that's not really it. That wasn't the thing. That's the thing I thought I was seeking, but that's not really the thing I was seeking. Like, what's your realization, about that from what did you think before and what do you believe now?
Yeah. For me, it was, how do I get to, that level that ultimately I feel is going to equal freedom and fulfillment. And as I, started getting deeper down that path, I actually joined a mastermind group, it's a millionaire mastermind group. And I wasn't a millionaire at the time, but I kind of weaseled my way in, and through a couple of different contacts and mentors, got invited to this group of about 15 guys that were, masterminding. And some of these guys net worth $100+ million. And so I'm thinking, oh man, I'm going to be around all of this money, all of this wealth. I'm going to, find a way to go from a millionaire to get into that, decamillionaire and all that kind of stuff. And when I got into the room, and I was about 25 at this time, So I'd had some good success flipping some houses, buying a few rental properties, building my real estate team. And I quickly learned when getting in the room that the conversation around money was actually very, very small. It was more about not just being a millionaire financially and being bankrupt in your health and your, contribution and giving back and being a good spouse or partner or business owner or, giving to charities or, living life to the fullest. It was about living like a millionaire in all of those pillars.
Can you pinpoint exactly, what it is that caused you to have that change in your belief system? I think it was around money.
Yeah, for me, it was an event that I went to. And mind you, when I got into real estate, I was 21. I was right out of college. I was broke. I was living at home with my dad. I was just trying to find a way to, get some momentum behind myself financially. And so the one track focus was, how do I make as much money as I can make? How do I create the lifestyle that I, had envisioned in my head and bring all of these dreams to reality? Many which I was thinking were going to be fulfilled through this, this means of having as much money available to myself as possible. And it wasn't until about, 3 or 4 years after being in the industry of flipping some houses, buying some rentals, building my real estate team that, I was starting to get some good momentum behind myself financially. And one of my mentors invited me to this little mastermind event with him and some of his accountability partners and, mentors in his network. And this was, a group of individuals that had net worths of, $100+ million. And, I'm thinking, I'm salivating at the fact of I'm going to be in a room of these individuals that I'm going to be able to get golden nuggets and wisdom and opportunities, and doors are going to open and relationships are going to happen where, I'm going to figure out how to make as much money as I possibly can. And long story short, when I got into the room and spent the weekend with these guys, the conversation around money was actually very, very small. And really the leading conversations were around other areas of what they felt led to and meant to be a wealthy and rich individual. And, I'd always seen a lot of people that were financially extremely abundant, but they were bankrupt in their health. They were bankrupt in how they showed up for their wives or their husbands. They were bankrupt in giving back to people. They were bankrupt as parents. They were bankrupt in, how they led their life. And they had a lot of money to show for it, but a lot of the other stuff was missing. Whereas these individuals were living like millionaires in all areas of their life that were important to them. And they were very intentional about it. And they were having conversations around it. And it really opened up my mindset to the fact that, one, it's not all about money. It's a part of the equation. It's a variable in the equation, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make up the entire equation. And when I was, 25 years old, the only conversation and the only, thing that I was leading with all the time was, how do I make more money, instead of how do I become somebody that attracts having more wealth and more abundance and more freedom and more money. And money wasn't just the answer to that. And so that really, over the last 5 years, has led me to leading a completely different lifestyle that has a lot of diversity in it when it comes to the way I go about creating my own wealthy lifestyle. Because I believe everybody's got a different definition of wealth, whether that's, barely making ends meet every month, but you get to travel and, live anywhere in the world and have fun, whether that's being a stay-at-home mom and spending as much time as you want with your kids, whether that's having $100 million in the bank and, bringing in $100,000 a month in passive income. Everybody has a different definition of what that means. But at the end of the day, let's be honest, money is what makes the world go round. And it still is something that should be a focus and an intention for people so that they can go out and design all of those other pillars of your life. But if all you do is focus on that one thing, you're going to, you're not going to be fulfilled by that. And I realized that, when I hit a certain milestone of making a certain amount of money and having a certain level of net worth, that at the end of the day, I still woke up the same every single day. I still, put my pants on the same, way every single day. And I still went after and chased the things that I was going to chase every day. So it wasn't that end all be all milestone. And that's something that I think, we've all heard other people say, but until you experience it, it's one of those things where it doesn't really click And that was the first time that I'd really been exposed to the idea that, being a millionaire in all areas of your life is more important than being just a millionaire in your bank account.
Yeah. And that really relates to is like fundamental issues of character, right? Like the more of these other pillars that you've actually established in your life, the more stable you are as a person, because you have relationships with others and you take care of yourself, and health is important to you. So then, something like can actually happen that's catastrophic to your financial situation. And the people that are strong in all those other areas, they're able to lean on those strengths to be able to help them recover. If you talk to people that are really avid athletes, for example, they can have huge detrimental things happen to their life. You know what they do? They lace up their shoes and they go for a run, because their athleticism is like the foundation of what they know is I can hit my run, I'm going to feel better, and then I can take an action of what I need to go next. So people that are really strong with their wealth, but they're poor in the other areas, they're actually really fragile. Because if anything happens to the wealth, now their whole life is gone. Like literally they had zero life except for this one thing. And if anything happens to that, I'm over. Right. And so I think that there's another discussion that's, on top of this is saying, okay, wealth isn't everything, but actually wealth might just be a part of something that's so much bigger, and that you can build your strength as a person. And all of these other areas that don't cost you anything. They just cost you time and attention and your dedication into building those up. What I found, I don't know if this is true for you, Matthew, but I found that the more that I've worked with people, over the years and coaching with them about real estate, I'm also like an attorney and whatnot with what I do as a professional speaking, but that the people that can actually build these other pillars of their life first and focus on that, as then the money piece of it actually became really simple, because they were able to attract great people into their life, and they were actually to be really strong to weather the bad pieces that are going to happen. Like we're going to come into your story here. And I can almost guarantee, even before I hear the story, that what allowed you to be able to bounce back from having something that was really detrimental happen to you financially wasn't anything more than the fact of, well, I have all these other pieces, these other tools that I relied on that helped me do that. And I had spent time cultivating those over the years. So something bad can happen and I can weather the storm. Probably, right?
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I could tell you that if what happened, which I'll share, and I didn't have all of the other areas that counterbalanced the extreme of that situation, who knows how I would have responded or where I would have, ended up being. That, at the end of the day, we all face extreme, adversity in our life in some capacity, whether it's someone passing away close to you, whether it's a financial hardship, whether it's a health hardship, whether it's some challenge in your business or your kids or whatever it may be. We all face that kind of stuff, but without some of the other areas of life being as abundant as they were, I probably would have been in that valley a whole lot longer than, getting back on the saddle and trekking to the summit again.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Cause that's where the real strength comes from, is having like a diversity of tools to pull onto. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gotta be. And the cool part about it is, what I always thought was a cool part about it is, like, most of the time people say, I don't have money, so I can't be happy, or I can't be relaxed, or I can't be peaceful. When the reality is that being is a state that you choose, right? And I can choose to be with my family and feel connected to them. And I can choose to be attentive to what my body needs and go to work out. And those are things that don't cost you anything except for the choice to go do it. And then the very idea of saying that I can create a huge amount of wealth to be a millionaire in 9 pillars of my life, and then there's just this one last one that's called wealth that'll just happen in its own time, because I'm such a badass and everything else that I'm doing that it's inevitable. I'll just put attention to it and I'll build it just like I did everything else.
It's so true. I mean, here's the way I think of it. It's like, what is wealth? And right, I said everybody's got a different definition of it. But if you were to strip away all of your material possessions, right, all of your money, and get to the root of what's left after that, you'd have your health, you'd have your family, your friends, right, your network, your relationships, you'd have freedom. And money is only a form of energy that ultimately, and this is just my opinion, that just gives you choice, right? And choice ultimately gives us the options to be able to do what we want, when we want, with who we want. So I think that, yes, money is an extremely important part of it. But when we get to the root of like what is most important about this crazy life that we're living, at least while we're on this planet, it's all of the other things. And if you stay only focused and your identity is so wrapped up just in the money, you're ultimately not going to lead to a fulfilling life, which is ultimately what I believe everybody wants, right? Is that happiness, that fulfillment. And that's why, if you've ever seen the documentary Happy, some of the poorest nations on the planet are rated as having the happiest people. Well, they've obviously figured something else out psychologically that allows them to feel that without having the material possessions, without having the money. Do I believe, though, based on the world we live in today, that having money gives you more options to amplify those things and to make a bigger impact? 100% yes. But spiritually, when you go internally to say that money is only going to make you happy, I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done there if that's the psychology that you're sticking to and using as a motivator for why you go out and do what you do.
Yeah, man. And I would even agree with you. And I would even pile on to the top of it that the guys that I see when people tell me and say, what I'm all about my money all the time. I actually look at those people and say, man, maybe that guy's actually a little weak, like maybe he's actually a little weak. Maybe he's actually a little fragile. How is that person going to respond if when things get tested? What happens if he loses? Is that a guy that bounces back from a loss? Or is that a guy that just crumbles because the moment he goes zero there, he's zero everywhere and he's got no other resources, to pull back on. And so like being wealthy in these other areas, I think is really what can pull you back strong. So, let's jump into the story, Matthew. I'm really excited now. I'm all amped up.
Let's do it.
To talk about this and to pick this story apart and what's going on with you before you get into it. So take us back to the very beginning before you jump into this deal. What's going on and what does that deal look like to you at the outset? What attracted you to it?
Yeah. So, I'd been flipping houses for, about 6 years now. And, I've done high volume in certain years. And for me, it was starting to think as the business owner of how can I do less volume and make the same amount of money or more. And I've been doing a majority of my flipping at this time in the Sacramento region, which our price points are a little bit, lower, at least in California terms compared to the Bay and LA and some of these other areas. So a lot of my flips were in, let's say, the 300 to 400, 500 range. And one of my mentors started getting out and flipping out in the Bay Area, doing $1, $2, $3 million type flips where, some of the projects scope of work wise were a little bit bigger. And I guess could be considered a little bit more of redevelopment than just remodeling or renovating. And the profit margins were massive. We're talking $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 profit margins on just one deal. And so that's kind of got sexy to me. And I started, paying attention to what she was doing and who she was networking with and some of the things that they were up to. And I said, why can't I do that? Right? Like, it's time to take that next step in my flipping journey in my career. And I had actually had a couple of successful ones that were 6-figure profits out in the Bay Area. And there was this one deal that was in the Berkeley Hills, overlooking Golden Gate Bridge, downtown San Francisco, downtown Berkeley, downtown Oakland, $1 million view on this really steep hillside. And this house was, pretty dilapidated. It was inherited through a family member. And I ended up, underwriting this deal and looking at this deal going, man, this grandeur vision of I can add a third story here. And I know that in the Bay Area, in this neighborhood, the price per square foot of selling this house was about $900 to $1,000 a square foot. And I knew that I could, being that I'm a partner in a construction company, build in the range of, let's say, 300 to 325 luxury wise per square foot. So there's a good chunk of margin I could make up by adding, let's say, another story and another 1,000 square feet. The comp supported it. And, it was just that mindset of I can add some massive value here, force some appreciation through that particular, channel of redevelopment. And so the profit margin on it was in the 250 to 300 range. And it was one of those things where I had one of my private lenders who really wanted to get their capital deployed, and they didn't want their money sitting on the sidelines. So it seemed like the right fit for the right deal. On paper, things looked good, but it was also one of those things where it was redevelopment. I mean, there was stuff that we were going to have to do, architectural designs, engineering designs. We were going to have to, sit in plan review with the city. And this was a city that I hadn't flipped in yet. So there was a handful of unknowns, but I just said, you know what, like I can figure this out along the way. And there was another person competing for the property. And mind you, on the normal flips that I do, which are, pretty simple compared to this kind of project, it was something where I'm always moving fast. One of my value propositions is we close in 7 days, right? And so on this particular deal, I felt the pressure to close quickly. And there were still some things that necessarily weren't fully flushed out and the due diligence wasn't 100% completed on. But I figured because I had enough profit margin to work with, if, some things happen, we had a little wiggle room, right? At least that's what I told myself. So I ended up closing on the deal. We started, working through the deal, and we started, learning some things pretty quickly on the deal.
So it sounded like this is one of those situations you come in and you say, hey, listen, I got special knowledge about how I can build here. And I know what's going on in the marketplace. So yeah, why don't I go ahead and jump into it? Like, do you feel at that moment, it's almost like a, how can I possibly lose type of situation?
At that time it was, yeah. Being one that there was, you got $250,000 of profit margin. And that was me feeling like I was being somewhat conservative on, some of the numbers. Because I'm always a big believer in underestimate what you can exit it for, overestimate what the rehab is going to be, and overestimate your holding time frame, just to leave yourself some buffer on all of those numbers. And on this particular deal, and it's crazy, I've lost on three or four deals of the 150 plus that I've done. And mind you, some of them been like, $1,000 or at the most like $5,000 or $8,000. This one ended up being an outlier and a great learning lesson. But I felt very confident going into it, and I felt like I had that knowledge. And at the same time, I also knew it was somewhat of a different arena because we were, adding square footage. And here's the difference on this deal is we really, what I didn't account for was the fact that there was a third party in this scenario that ultimately I didn't take into account, which was the city. And when you start going in and working with the city, at the end of the day, they ultimately can be the decision maker, the one who really throws a wrench in your plans. And so I didn't account for a lot of the times, one, the timing issues of now working with the city and how long they can take, but also some of the things that they can, bring the iron fist down on and create a lot of problems unless you want to sit there and pay attorney fees and fight with them. So those were some of the things that I just never had accounted for on the front end of this. And when I got into the deal and we started working through some of the things, we quickly learned that there was some stuff that was beyond the normal scope of just a cosmetic or even an extensive flip. This was a full-on redevelopment, which is a completely different arena when we're, talking about quote unquote flipping houses.
Mm. So when you get into like a new deal like this, because there was a couple of flags for you, right, that says this is a little different than something I've done before. Did you bring anybody else in that was experienced with that particular type of deal, or did you only find out that it was really different enough after you're already into it?
Yeah, after I was already into it. And, that was one of the big learning lessons of, I've always been a big believer of like surround yourself with people that have been there, done that, have the experience, even if you have to cut them in, whatever that may be, because then you'll have, one, the confidence to know that you're going to do it right. Two, you'll be able to, leverage their experience, their wisdom, their connections. And three, that I would rather have the foundational, education to do it the right way so that I can complete that project the way it needs to be completed and know what the right way of doing it is moving forward on all the other deals, even if I had to pay them. I didn't do it on this deal. And so there were, now looking back, a handful of things that I knew in my gut I should have done and I didn't do. And I let my ego really get in the way of going like, I can figure this out. I've been through 150 deals. Like, I'm good. I got this. And really, there were a lot of things that I should have pulled people in on and or really pushed into from a due diligence perspective well beyond moving forward. So mistake number one was not giving myself enough time for due diligence, because normally I felt that pressure of going like, my proposition is I close quickly, and that's one of the reasons why I get a discount. Well, in this particular scenario, there were a handful of things that I should have done in my due diligence period before I closed escrow that I didn't, and just assumed that, you know, we had plenty of room and the ability to get around these things after the fact, should they arise, which I didn't know what I didn't know at that time. And that was, you know, one of the first areas that I really had missed the boat on.
Is that one of those scenarios where you're kind of struggling against saying, you know, is my gut telling me something here, or am I just kind of afraid with the deal?
It was definitely that inner dialogue going back and forth. And it's funny because all of the times that I've made mistakes in my life, there's a book that I really love by Susan Scott. It's called Fierce Conversations. And one of the things that she says in that book is, don't listen to your gut, obey your gut. And I was listening to my gut, but I wasn't ultimately like obeying those feelings that I had in my gut. And, you know, it's crazy. Some of the data behind your gut is like that inner intuition, right? And like the way our bodies are designed, that gut feeling, we all know usually when we've made a mistake, it's like, I knew I shouldn't have done that. I felt it and I did it anyways. And this was one of those scenarios where there was a couple times in the process where I'm like, I don't know, but I kept justifying why I could keep moving forward with the deal and why it wasn't that big of a deal and why I could figure it out and why I didn't need to consult with this person. And because I had all this experience and when ultimately I was stepping into a new arena that I should have, you know, checked my ego at the door at, done a little bit more due diligence on, pulled the right people in, taken the necessary time to flush out some of those, you know, red flags and question marks and gray areas that I didn't have clarity in. And I continued to move forward anyways.
What do you do? Like, is there cheap ways that you could involve people early on in that deal? Like, let's say you're having this debate with your gut, right? Like, am I just scared? Is this new and I'm just kind of being fearful of it? Or is this really my gut trying to tell me like, hey bro, you're not really good for this, and you know you're not, but it's like you're not really wanting to believe that with your head, right? Is there like a cheap way to get people like involved? Like sometimes, you know, when I've run into situations like that, like I pulled in, tried to some other type of professional and pay him hourly to be like, hey, just check me on this and make sure this is right, even though it's going to cost me $500 or something like that, or $1,000 to have it. It's cheaper than having a partner come in, which can be its own difficult piece. But, you know, is there something like that you do whenever you're butting up against that even now? Or
oh yeah, 100%. Like I'd never have an issue paying somebody for their expertise.
What kind of people do you look for? Like in that scenario that you were just going through, right? If you could go back and like be the, you know, the angel on the shoulder, it'd be like, Matthew, go and hire this person. Like, what would that have been, Matthew?
Well, number one, I have such an extensive network of amazing real estate investors that I could have easily humbled myself and just went and asked a handful of people that already do this. So that I could have gotten that feedback and advice for free. So that's where I'm kicking myself, right? Who do you know in your network, or who do you know who knows somebody in your network that you could, you know, tap into their wisdom and experience without having to go spend a bunch of money right out of the gate. But then secondarily is, you know, definitely, you know, finding individuals that, you know, can consult with you on a certain aspect of the process that you aren't as comfortable or familiar with.
That's a very expensive piece of humble pie.
Dude, I mean, I don't even think we've really jumped into how much money I lost on this deal, but it was over $180,000. And, you know, people are probably going, wait, $250,000 profit margin, he loses $180,000. Like that's a pretty big swing right there. And that's, you know, when you're playing at the $1 million and up price point, when you're talking about holding costs, and when you're talking about missing things like this that I missed, those things add up very, very quickly. And so it was definitely one of the biggest learning lessons in my career. It was one of the most trying times of my career. I mean, mentally, I've always been somebody like, I don't get stressed out. Oh, I don't get depressed. Oh, I don't. Right. And I would say there were many sleepless nights, a lot of anxiety. There was, a lot of, I guess, I don't want to say shame, but more so of like just really upset at myself that I didn't do some of the things that I did. It was a confidence hit. It was, so I could go on and on. It was a tough deal. And yet looking back now and the experience that I gained from that, the knowledge that I gained from that, the resources and some of the connections I gained from that, have really set me up for some massive success that I've had moving forward, and where I'm at today of playing at a higher level in development, and some of the things that I'm working on right now with some much, much bigger projects than this one was. So this, for everybody that is wondering what that next level is for them, just know that what you're doing right now was once a stretch for you. Like, it was once something that you wanted to do, but didn't know how you were going to do it and didn't know if you had the ability to do it, but you're doing it. So that was one of the things for me where I really told myself, like, this is a part of the process. If I really want to get to being 100 millionaire, if I want to get to building a high-rise building in the skyline of Sacramento or my area, if I want to do some of these things, was it an expensive lesson? Yes. But the fact that I'm in the batter's box is the only way I'm going to get on base, is the only way I'm going to round the bases and score runs. If I'm a spectator, I'm not getting paid. The players are the one who gets paid, right? And no player do I know that steps into the batter's box bats 1,000. They strike out too. And so justifying that and kind of telling myself, like, this is all part of the process. Even when I was going through it, it's hard, right? You can tell yourself that stuff, and yet it doesn't always sink in, or it doesn't really resonate.
I doubt you would have believed that in the moment. If somebody was like, oh, yeah, Matthew, don't worry about it. You got to step up to the plate. This is you stepping up to the plate. You would probably tell the person to go to hell. I just lost $180,000 on a flip, and I did it, and it was boneheaded the way I did it because I didn't want to ask people to go with it, and I'm pissed at myself for doing that. I'm like, that's really the internal dialogue at the time. But there's
100%.
There's an awesome piece to it, right? Which is you hit these dips, right? Like you had a big dip here, and then there's something that you did in that process that allowed you to rebound, like, into what it is you're going on. So what are you doing, when that piece happens, which could happen to any of us? It's really outside of our control to a large extent. It's an illusion of control that we have over these deals. Right. So if that happens, what is it that you do? And, what is that? Is that like a process? You're like, hey, I went back to my routines, of like, here's what I do every day to start rebuilding the momentum of what you need to do to take yourself from, reassembling the pieces internally to help you move forward? Or what does that look like?
Yeah. For me, I was definitely in a funk. I'll say that. And, you try and just keep going, moving forward. That's the one thing that I could say is, no matter if you're depressed, if you're upset at yourself, you're frustrated, like, the one thing you can do to make sure that you eventually get out of it is just to keep taking a small step forward every single day. It may not be the big steps that you want to be taking. It may not be your best step that you're taking, but you got to at least keep moving. You can't stay stagnant. So that's one thing that helped for sure. The fact that I had an accountability group, I've been in an accountability group with five other guys for the last 3.5 years, from all around the country. We get on a call every single week. I just had it actually right before I jumped on this podcast for 1 hour. And we, hold each other accountable to the goals that we set every single quarter to keep the needle moving forward. But we also really support each other when we're going through some shit, whether it's, stuff that you're going through with your wife, with your kids, and your business. And so the one thing that I was glad I did and wish I also would have done sooner was be extremely vulnerable and open in sharing what I was going through. I ultimately did end up sharing it. and they helped me through it, and gave me great advice and, great support. But I wish I would have done it sooner. And it's hard when the wound is open to want to get that feedback. You're not always in a place to receive it, and you're not always in a place to be ready to do what needs to be done in order to get out of it. But if I could have shortened that window up, I definitely would have. And you hit the nail on the head. For me, it was routine. Like, I track my habits obsessively. I mean, I created a freaking planner for it. I mean, I started a couple years ago in an Excel sheet. I sell and have a planner that is not only a day planner, but more, it's an awareness tool around the habits and the routines that I know help Matt show up every single day at the highest level. And when I realized that I was completely out of my routine, I wasn't doing my early morning wake ups, I wasn't doing my meditation, I wasn't doing my journaling, I wasn't doing my, accountability check-ins and a lot of the things that have served me at a high level, that brought my awareness back to those things and helped me get back in that momentum phase. So that was really, really important for that. And one of the things that, I did that I don't know if we touched on, which I like to real fast, is to really reflect on, like, what could I have done differently? And I racked my brain over this over and over and over again. And on this particular deal, when it comes to development stuff, it's not flipping. It's ultimately not flipping. It is development. And there are a lot of different hoops and a lot of different timelines and a lot of different processes that go with development. So what I had to really understand and realize was the fact that I was no longer doing that particular niche of real estate investing. I was trying to develop a house, and I was trying to create and build something that wasn't just a flip that I was going to get in and out of. And so that was number one. Number two was the due diligence side, to really take my time and be willing to walk away from the deal if I didn't do the things that I know I needed to do. If that person didn't want to let me do it, then so be it. I'm not going to put myself at risk like that again. And when you're talking about development, there are things that you really got to dig into, the nitty gritty of the fine print. And as an attorney, I know you know this, right? There's a lot of stuff that can be hidden in some of those things that if you don't take into account, one little thing could completely throw off the entire deal. And so on this particular case, there were things that I didn't go down to the city and really dig in with the building departments, with the planning departments, with their engineers, and understand that, based on this particular property, being that it was on a hillside and we were going to have to bore down into the ground because we were in California, earthquakes are a big deal. Going down into the ground, deep into the ground, and boring in, and then pouring new foundation, and then now letting the foundation sit for 6 months. So I couldn't even like start framing. I couldn't start doing anything on the property for 6 months after getting plan approval, which was a 4 to 6 month process. So that added a year onto my holding costs with an $11,000 payment just right there. So that was a $120,000 swing that I didn't even account for on the front end, that if I would have just went down to the city, they would have said, hey, this particular area, you're on the earthquake fault line. You're going to have to not only bore down after getting us all the plans and us stamping it off and engineering and all that good stuff, but once the settling happens, because with the moving of, the shifting of the tectonic plates, being in this area, you can't, after pouring your foundation, even start to build or touch that foundation or build up on the property for at least another 6 months. So that was just one little thing, right? Of just doing the due diligence on that kind of stuff. I could have done that a whole lot better. You said it. I could have definitely consulted with and brought in people. I'd rather own a slice of a watermelon than 100% of a grape. And it happened to be that this grape was like a raisin that was shriveling up really freaking fast. So that was another big lesson of like, I went away from a lot of the stuff that had made me successful. And I don't want to say I was reading my own press clippings or I was, thinking I was too good for it. It was just one of those things where I just got too comfortable and I didn't take the time that needed to be taken on the due diligence side, which, is so, so critical when you want to have a very successful real estate deal, especially on the development side of things. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of due diligence, a lot of numbers crunching. And I treated this like a flip instead of a development.
Wow, man. Well, I mean, that's a ton of good info. I think that really hits, home for just about, a lot of people that I've talked to. It really boils down to a lot of is the due diligence plays, whether you might not be at risk in California with earthquakes, but there's a lot of people that have lost money on not doing their due diligence and checking with the city about what they need to do. Part of that, it seems to be an awareness of when you're outside of your depth, and that can be tricky, right? Because a lot of times things that seem to be slightly outside of our depth, we say, okay, I'm good with that, right? But from hearing your story, you mentioned it a few times, and what just really rung true for me was that I've heard from really successful people that have had downturns is that they stop their process. They had a process that led them up to, and at that point, and then something changed. And it's kind of like the funny thing that I think that happens a lot of times with fighters. Like I used to do jiu-jitsu and kickboxing and compete in martial arts, 10 years ago. And it was funny to me that guys would get all the way to their championship fight and they'd be training the same way with the same crew. And they're like, all right, I'm fighting for the championship. I'm changing up my diet. I'm going to get a whole new team. I'm going to do all this stuff that's different. I'm like, no, man, that's your process. That's what led you here.
Yeah.
Your process is who you are and what you're doing. And that's what the thing that you're fine tuning. I just think it was really cool if anybody's watching the videos of this, that Matt has like this monster sheet that looks like all of the things that he tracks for like his daily routines, what he's doing with his journaling, his meditation. And if you want to show that off, like that is what it looks like to be able to say, like, am I keeping track of what am I doing every day that builds me out internally so I have the right habits? So then like making the right decisions is on reflex for what I need to do. But yeah, man, I mean, so when you're in that moment, you have like the downturn of it. I just want to touch on one thing. If anybody that's listening is in that place that you're in at that moment, what would you, if you were talking to that person just directly, what would you tell that person? Like, hey, this is like the one thing or the top 3 things that you need to start doing like right now. Like go to see somebody or go to vent to a mentor, or what would that look like?
Yeah. So the vulnerability piece is, I think, the toughest thing to do in that moment when you're down, and yet probably the most critical. Being that every time I've been in a tough spot or situation, when I'm 100% honest with myself and honest with the other people that I know can help me, it allows me to get what I need. When I'm not 100% honest with myself or with the people that can help me, I ultimately can't get served at the highest level and course correct the way I need to course correct. So the vulnerability piece is really tough, especially when that wound is open, right? It's like throwing salt in the wound, and yet ultimately, it's also what cleans the wound. So that's one big thing that I, have told myself moving forward after reflecting and having a lot of these conversations of going, if and when this happens again, because at the end of the day, it will. Like, this isn't, if you continue to try and expand your life, you're going to venture into uncharted territory. Like, there's just going to be things that you don't know, and you're going to face a mistake. You're going to have hardship. So it's when it does happen again, I want to make sure that I am as vulnerable and honest with myself as possible, and with the people that I know can help me, because I know I have a lot of people in my world that do want to help me. And the only way they can do that is if I'm being honest with them and sharing what's going on. The other piece is just like what you said, don't get away from what works for you. And the reason why I have my planner, and I didn't fill out my planner for almost a month and a half. In a month and a half, I mean, that was like a major funk for me. And I was justifying all the reasons why I wasn't doing it, but to do the things that work for you. And the reason I fill this planner out is not to stay organized with my day, which yes, it is, but more importantly, it's to stay hyper aware of when I'm showing up at my best and when I'm not. And when I'm showing up at my best, to double down on what those things are. And when I'm not, to scrap those things or to figure out how I can course correct as quickly as possible. So to stay hyper aware during those tough times requires a lot of discipline. And if you can stay committed to the things that work best for you, that's going to help you move through that situation a whole lot faster. So those are some of the things that I know I didn't do that I wish I would have done differently, and I will do differently moving forward. And the last piece that I can think of was, for me, it was info sponging. And info sponging for me is to continue to read or listen to things that I know keep my mind on a positive track. And I was so stuck up here in my head that I wasn't leaving any room for new, inviting, exciting, mind-bending, expanding information to come in and inspire me and keep me moving in the right direction. And instead, I was really drowning and swimming in my own sorrow and, the stuff that ultimately wasn't serving me at the end of the day.
Yeah, man. I think that's awesome. One thing that I found time and time again for most everybody is just simple awareness is curative of the problem. Most of the time it's because we're not even aware of what's going on with us or inside of others. We're just blind to it or just living out like a pattern in a way. So just taking the time to even write to say like, oh, this is a time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be aware for 60 seconds today of like what's going on. That alone makes huge impacts. And I don't know if you've done this before, where you were talking about, hey, like go find somebody else in your life to go talk to. One of the things, I think people have always wanted to talk to me for some reason, always wanted to open up to me throughout my life. And it happens to me all the time on airplanes. And there's something weird about an airplane that allows people to really share like 100% of what's going on. It's like so much better seemingly than counseling, because you're with this person, you'll probably never see them again. Right. And then you can just share about like, here's what's really happening that in my life that's not working for me or whatever, and be totally honest with it in an hour and a half, and you're gone and you're not paying them. So it's like, there's no weird like counselor like dynamic going on. Nobody's trying to psychoanalyze each other, but it's like, this is what's just happening. And people like I've had friends from airplanes for years from now, because they just had that one conversation with me about like something that was happening in their life. And so the only reason I bring that up is that there's an idea that some people have is like, I don't want everybody else to know that this is what's really going on with me, because it's too painful for me to show up that vulnerable to sometimes people in life, which is the hardest, because we have a whole persona sometimes we develop around that we don't want to threaten with it.
Yep.
And I'm saying, doesn't have to be somebody you know. You can just go up to anybody that's willing to like show up with you. And surprisingly, most people are, and just like start talking to them about like, probably don't start with the heady, super deep stuff, but most people, are cool with that. And if they're not, then you can find another person. Right.
Great point.
Maybe make a great friend out of it. So the world is probably more abundant than we all probably assume it is. A lot of times that the lack of scarcities around money disappears after we get $40,000 plus per year. It doesn't really contribute much to happiness, or maybe that number's up to 60, but it's something that's not nearly as high as we would think. And we think, oh, I don't have enough friends. I don't have enough support. I don't have enough connections, but we're surrounded with a world of people, and we're more connected to each other than we've ever been in the history of what's available to us. But it does take action, and to jumping out there and to actually have to go do it. Right. And I just want to applaud you on that, to saying that, that looks like something that you have some strong habits on, which is, when it hits the fan, that you're like, all right, well, I'm going back to just what works for me and taking action on it. And if I was just going to underline anything, we typically have like, what's a lesson learned from today's episode? And that's something that, I think I've learned from you today, Matt, on, just like the real power of saying, I'm really going to journal. And that's really like my go-to thing to do with it. Out of your story, like what would you say is like a takeaway item that you would want everybody to have?
Oh man, one, don't let stubbornness make a bad situation worse. And we can all be stubborn and justify why we're doing what we're doing, or why we shouldn't do something, or why we should keep doing something. But to really remove yourself as a third party outside looking in and go, what is the best thing for this situation to make this move in the direction that I want it to make. And oftentimes we have to remove ourselves from the situation to get that clarity, and stubbornness can, prolong some of those things. The other thing I would say is, at the end of the day, like we all fall, there is no linear, path to where we want to go, and you're going to fall down on that path, right? Like I fall down every day in my thinking or within my habits or whatever. Like I'm none of us are perfect. Like we're all flawed. And what I've found is it's actually more about getting off course and getting and finding ways to 2.0 your mindset, your habits, your disciplines, your beliefs to get back on course that much quicker. Because if you can, the fail forward, fail fast, fail often, you look at the most successful people in the world and on the planet, they've often had some of the biggest failures because they're playing life at the biggest level. And they know that that's all part of the process. So I've really, that was one experience and many others along the way, looking back, that has allowed me to change my relationship and the conversation that I have with failure, and using it as a stepping stone or a launching pad to that next tier of thinking, of beliefs, of discipline, of deals, of whatever it may be, and not allowing that to hold you back and to shrink you into playing smaller and to going to the quote unquote safe spaces. And instead, as long as you reflect and use those lessons to your advantage, you're going to unlock new levels of life that you've never been before, and to actually celebrate those failures. So even though it can be hard in the moment, to keep that, subconsciously implanted in my brain, and hopefully for other people, is to change the conversation you have with yourself and with others around failure, and know that by really stretching and expanding and going after the things that you really want to go after, yeah, you're going to face some of those challenges and hardships and failures, but also knowing that those are pieces of your DNA that can never be taken away, and that when used correctly will unlock the rich and fulfilling and wealthy and whatever kind of life that you want, just by going after and having those experiences.
That's awesome, man. And I just want to encourage everybody and underline for everybody is that Matt didn't start these practices when he failed. Like he had, this was a practice that he started while he was being successful, and that it was, he deviated from it. And that's what it was, a part of what we could say potentially a part of what happened in that scenario. And then he came back to it for part of his rebound. Right. So when we're thinking about like, how are we going to build wealth starts with what habits am I building with myself today? Right, of how I'm acting. And I think that's really cool with what you do with that, because that's how you build those other pieces of your life that give you the strength that are going to allow you to rebound. It was in that intentionality with that awareness, at least from what I can tell, that allowed you to do that. So this is really something that we should, if you're not doing it right now, something that I've been slacking on. I think I'm 4 days without doing it because I've been, quote unquote, so busy that I haven't been. So this is a great slap in the face for me, being like, yeah, man, I'm off course right now. I need to get back on course and get back to doing my, my intentional awareness on what I'm doing, Matt. So like, I really appreciate the wake up call for me this morning on that, from hearing your story. I'm like, okay, this is great.
Right on, brother.
And with it, and I hope everybody else does. So if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can, all my social media handles the same on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's official Matty A, MATTYA, official Matty A. Or they can just email me, matty@sixfigureflipper.com. That's the number 6figureflipper.com, matty@sixfigureflipper.com.
That's awesome. And thanks. And of course, my name is Scott Royal Smith. I'm your host here at the Real Estate Nerds podcast, the owner of Royal Legal Solutions, everything for tax, legal, and real estate for every investor out there in the U.S. So appreciate you guys for joining in today. Thank you for coming on the show, and we'll be in touch. And that's all for today. I'm your host, Scott Royal Smith, Esquire, attorney and longtime real estate investor, owner of Royal Legal Solutions, the one-stop shop for tax, legal, and business advice exclusively for real estate investors. That's all for this Bad Beats episode. I'm your host, Scott Royal Smith, with the Real Estate Nerds podcast. Did you see yourself in any part of that story? I know I did. If you enjoyed the show, leave a review to help clue in the sleeping masses of what they need to know and what we all need reminders of. Do your good deed for the day. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.